What would you do if the person you loved most, the one whose approval you craved your entire life, looked you in the eye on their deathbed and declared you a failure? What if, in their final act on this earth, they cemented that judgment in front of the world, leaving you with nothing but shame while showering your sibling with everything you ever dreamed of? This isn't just a question. For Leo Vance, this was the cold, hard reality that slammed into him in the suffocating silence of a lawyer's office. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and polished mahogany, felt heavy, each molecule a tiny weight pressing down on his chest. He sat on a stiff-backed chair, his worn corduroy jacket a stark contrast to the tailored silk of his sister, Clarissa, who sat opposite him. Between them, a large screen flickered to life, and the face of their father, Arthur Vance, filled it. Even in this pre-recorded message, his gaze was as sharp and unforgiving as it had been in life. Arthur, a titan of industry who had built a corporate empire from nothing, looked directly into the camera, his voice devoid of warmth, a tool of precision. "To my daughter, Clarissa," he began, and a faint, triumphant smile touched Clarissa's lips. "You have always understood what it takes. Ambition. A killer instinct. You see the world for what it is, a battlefield. You are a worthy successor to what I have built." The screen then showed a wire transfer confirmation. $50 million. The entire liquid fortune, the controlling shares of Vance Industries, all of it, passed to her with a clinical click. Clarissa's posture straightened, her chin lifting in vindication. Then, Arthur's digital eyes shifted, and Leo felt them pierce through the screen, through the years of disappointment, and pin him to his chair. "And to my son, Leo," his father's voice dropped, laced with a chilling finality. "You, who traded the boardroom for a classroom. Who chose sentiment over strategy. You have passion, they tell me, but passion doesn't build empires. It doesn't secure a legacy." A long, excruciating pause hung in the air. "Therefore, you will learn the lesson I tried to teach you in life. The world rewards strength, not weakness. Don't expect a penny. You are to receive nothing from my estate." The screen went black. The silence that followed was louder than the words themselves. It was a ringing, echoing void where a lifetime of hope had just been executed. Leo couldn't breathe. It wasn't about the money. It was the public branding, the final, irrevocable stamp of his father's disapproval. He was nothing. A failure. He risked a glance at his sister. Clarissa wasn't looking at him with pity, but with a cold, glittering triumph. She saw this not as a family tragedy, but as the rightful conclusion of a competition she had won. Her victory was absolute, and his humiliation was just part of her prize. The lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Albright, cleared his throat, but Leo didn't hear him. He was trapped in the memory of his father's last words, a verdict delivered from beyond the grave, cementing his place as the family's great disappointment. The lawyer's cough brought Leo back to the crushing present. "Mr. Vance." "Leo," Mr. Albright said, his voice softer than Leo expected. But Leo couldn't process kindness. He could only see the ghost of his father's sneer, feel the phantom weight of his disapproval. Clarissa rose from her chair, the rustle of her silk suit sounding like a victor's flag snapping in the wind. She walked over to him, not to console, but to gloat. She looked down at his simple, worn shoes, then back at his face, her expression a perfect mask of condescending pity. "Well, little brother," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "I guess Dad had the last word after all. Maybe now you'll understand that your little charities and your hopeless students don't pay the bills. This," she gestured around the opulent room, "is the real world." She leaned in closer, her whisper a venomous dart. "You chose your path. You got exactly what you deserved, nothing." With a final, dismissive glance, she turned and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and shattered dignity in her wake. Leo remained frozen, the echo of her words merging with his father's. He felt a profound, hollow ache spread through him. It was the ache of a son who had loved his father, even when that love was unreturned, even when it was met with a wall of impossible expectations. He thought back to the countless arguments, the shouting matches across the vast dining room table. He had tried to explain his choices, his calling to be a teacher in a school where kids had nothing, where a single, caring adult could change the trajectory of a life. "That's not a career, it's a hobby for the wealthy," his father had boomed. "You have a legacy to uphold, a duty. Instead, you want to wipe noses for a living." Leo had never been able to make him see that the legacy he wanted to build was one of compassion, not capital. He believed in lifting people up, not climbing over them. Now, alone in the room that symbolized everything he had rejected, he felt a crushing wave of doubt. Was his father right? Had he been naive? His life was a constant struggle. His paycheck barely covered his rent and student loans. He saw his students face poverty and neglect every single day, and his ability to help felt so small, so insignificant against the scale of their problems. He had sacrificed financial security, his family's respect, for a principle. And what did he have to show for it? An empty bank account and a father's posthumous curse. Mr. Albright quietly began shuffling papers, the sound pulling Leo from his spiraling thoughts. The lawyer looked at him, and for a fleeting moment, Leo saw something in the old man's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something else, something deeper and more complex. An unreadable expression that held a flicker of anticipation. But Leo dismissed it. It was surely a trick of the light, a projection of his own desperate need for a lifeline that didn't exist. The will was clear. The verdict was in. He was, and always would be, nothing to his father. Leo walked out of the polished marble lobby and onto the bustling city street, but he felt utterly disconnected from the world around him. The towering skyscrapers, monuments to the kind of power his father worshipped, seemed to mock him. He pulled the collar of his jacket up against a wind that felt colder than it was and began the long walk to the subway, a journey back to his own world, a world his father and sister considered a complete failure. The next morning, the harsh fluorescent lights of his classroom at Northwood Elementary were a jarring contrast to the soft, recessed lighting of the law office. Here, the walls were covered in chipped paint and the vibrant, messy artwork of 6-year-olds. The smell wasn't of leather and wood polish, but of chalk dust, disinfectant, and the faint, sweet scent of cinnamon from the breakfast program. As his students filed in, a cacophony of untied shoelaces, excited chatter, and minor squabbles, the crushing weight on Leo's chest began to lift, just slightly. A little girl with bright, curious eyes, Maria, ran up to him and handed him a crumpled drawing. "It's you, Mr. Vance," she said, beaming. "You're a superhero in the picture." A stick figure with a cape labeled Mr. V was fighting off a monster labeled Mean Words for the first time in 24 hours. A genuine smile touched Leo's lips. This was his reality. It wasn't a balance sheet or a stock portfolio, it was the trust in a child's eyes, the small victories of a student finally learning to read, the knowledge that in this one small room, he made a difference. But that night, alone in his small, sparsely furnished apartment, the doubt returned with a vengeance. He looked at the stack of bills on his kitchen counter, the final demand notice for his car payment peeking out from the pile. He ate a meager dinner of instant noodles, the taste of ash in his mouth. He scrolled through the news on his phone and saw Clarissa's face, smiling confidently from the business section. "Clarissa Vance takes the helm," the headline read. The article praised her bold, decisive leadership, a euphemism for the ruthlessness their father had so admired. He felt a bitter sting of injustice. He worked every hour he could, pouring his heart and soul into a job that society claimed to value, but refused to properly support, and he was drowning. His sister, who had never shown an ounce of empathy for another human being, was now celebrated as a visionary. He threw his phone onto the couch in disgust. The shame was a physical thing, a knot in his stomach. He had told his colleagues he had to attend a family matter, how could he ever admit the truth? That his own father had publicly declared him worthless and cut him off without a cent. He felt stripped bare, his life's philosophy held up to the light and judged as flimsy and foolish. Had he been arrogant to think he knew better than his father? Maybe true strength was the ability to be pragmatic, to be ruthless, to win. Maybe he wasn't a hero in a classroom, maybe he was just a fool who had thrown away a kingdom for a handful of crayon drawings. The weight of his father's final judgment pressed down, and for the first time, Leo truly wondered if he had made a terrible, life-altering mistake. Within a week, Clarissa's bold, decisive leadership began to carve through Vance Industries like a scythe. Her first official act as CEO was to announce a corporate restructuring. To the stock market, it sounded efficient. To the employees, it was a death sentence. She laid off over 200 workers, many of whom had been with the company for decades, loyal employees who remembered her father when he was just a man with a single factory and a big dream. She saw them not as people, but as liabilities on a spreadsheet. Next, she slashed the company's community outreach programs, initiatives that Leo, in his university days, had passionately lobbied his father to create. The youth mentorship program, the annual scholarship fund for underprivileged students, the local arts sponsorship, all were dismantled overnight. Frivolous expenses, she called them in a memo to the board. "We are a business, not a charity." Her words were a direct echo of her father's, but they lacked the grudging respect Arthur had sometimes shown for his son's efforts. Clarissa's actions were born of pure, unadulterated disdain for what she considered weakness. At a lavish dinner with the board of directors, she raised a glass of champagne. "My father built this company on strength," she declared, her voice ringing with confidence. "But in his later years, he grew sentimental. My brother, as you know, encouraged this softness. I am here to restore the true Vance legacy. We will be leaner, more aggressive, and more profitable than ever before." The board members, a collection of men who saw the world in quarterly reports, applauded enthusiastically. They were thrilled. Clarissa was exactly the kind of leader they wanted, one who prioritized profit above all else. They saw her ruthlessness not as a character flaw, but as a strategic asset. One of the older board members, a man who had known Leo's father for 40 years, leaned in. "Your brother must be disappointed," he said, a testing quality in his tone. Clarissa laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. "My brother is busy teaching children how to share their toys. He wouldn't understand the first thing about running a multi-million-dollar corporation. Dad knew that. That's why he left the company to me, and left Leo to his hobbies." The table chuckled, and Clarissa felt a surge of power. She had not only inherited a fortune, she had inherited her father's authority, his right to judge and dismiss. She was finally free from Leo's shadow, the quiet, moralizing presence that had always felt like an unspoken accusation. She was proving that her way, the cold, hard, profitable way, was the right way. The only way. She was the true heir, in spirit and in fact. She was making the company strong again, just as her father would have wanted. Or so she believed. A month after the will reading, just as Leo was beginning to resign himself to his new reality, his phone rang. It was Mr. Albright's assistant. "Mr. Albright requests your presence at the office to sign some final disbursement paperwork," she said, her voice professional and detached. Leo's heart sank. The word disbursement felt like another twist of the knife. More papers to formalize his disinheritance. He agreed to go, wanting only to get the final humiliation over with. When he arrived, the grand reception area was empty. The assistant led him directly to Mr. Albright's personal office, bypassing the formal conference room where the will had been read. The lawyer was alone, standing by the window overlooking the city. "Leo, thank you for coming," he said, turning to face him. His expression was serious, but the strange, unreadable flicker was back in his eyes. "Please, sit." He gestured to a comfortable leather armchair, a world away from the stiff, formal chair he'd occupied before. After Leo sat, Albright didn't present him with a stack of legal documents. Instead, he walked over to a safe hidden behind a painting and retrieved a small, unassuming wooden box. It was old, the dark wood worn smooth with age, and it bore no markings. He placed it gently on the table in front of Leo. "This was not part of the official estate," Albright said quietly. "It was a personal effect. Your father left explicit instructions that I was to give it to you, and only you." 1 month after his passing, Leo stared at the box, his mind racing. A personal effect. His father had never been a sentimental man. Everything he owned was either functional, or a symbol of status. This simple box felt completely out of character. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, old-fashioned key. It was heavy, made of brass that had tarnished to a deep, mottled brown. Beneath it lay a small, folded piece of notepaper. Leo picked it up and unfolded it. On it, in his father's familiar, sharp handwriting, were just 10 words. "The strongest foundations are not built with money." Leo read the sentence again and again. It was a complete contradiction of every lesson his father had ever tried to teach him. "The world runs on money, Leo. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford." The phrases echoed in his memory, a discordant chorus against the simple, profound statement in his hand. What did it mean? Was it a final, cruel riddle? A parting shot to remind him of the material world he had forfeited? He looked from the cryptic note to the ancient key, a deep sense of confusion washing over him. This wasn't closure. It was a loose thread, a tiny, perplexing detail in a story he thought had ended. For the first time since the will reading, the suffocating certainty of his failure was pierced by a pinprick of something else, mystery. Leo took the box home, the weight of the key in his pocket feeling both real and symbolic. The note sat on his kitchen table, a silent challenge. "The strongest foundations are not built with money." He spent days staring at it, trying to decipher its meaning. It felt like one of his father's business riddles, but the answer wasn't profit or leverage. It felt personal. He examined the key more closely. It was ornate, with a distinctive crest on its head, a stylized V intertwined with a hammer and gear. He had seen it before, long ago. A memory surfaced from deep within his childhood, his father taking him, as a small boy, to a noisy, sprawling factory. It was long before the gleaming corporate headquarters, back when Arthur Vance was still building, not just managing, his empire. It was the place where it had all begun. The original Vance fabrication plant. The building had been decommissioned for years, a relic on the industrial outskirts of the city, an area that had fallen into disrepair. He pulled up a news article he'd seen weeks ago, the one about Clarissa's aggressive new strategy. His blood ran cold as he read the line again. "The board has also approved the demolition of several non-performing assets, including the original factory site on Miller Street, to make way for a new commercial development. They were going to destroy it." A sudden, inexplicable urgency seized him. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew he had to go. The next Saturday, he drove his sputtering car to the forgotten side of town. The factory stood like a sleeping giant, its windows boarded up, its brick facade stained with decades of grime. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, plastered with demolition notices. It looked desolate, abandoned. But to Leo, it felt like a destination. He found a loose section of the fence and slipped through, his heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and adrenaline. The air inside the grounds was still and heavy. He walked to the main building's administrative entrance. Above the rusted steel door was a faint, weathered carving of the same crest that was on his key, the V with the hammer and gear. He took a deep breath and slid the old, tarnished key into the lock. For a moment, there was resistance. Then, with a loud, grating click that echoed in the silence, the lock turned. The heavy door groaned open into darkness. He stepped inside, using his phone's flashlight to cut through the gloom. The beam fell upon a cavernous, dust-choked space filled with the ghostly shapes of silent machinery. He was standing in the heart of his father's origin story, guided by a cryptic note and a key that shouldn't exist, searching for an answer he couldn't begin to imagine. He made his way through the derelict factory floor, the beam of his flashlight dancing across hulking, silent machines. He was looking for his father's old office. He remembered it as a small, glass-walled room overlooking the main floor, the nerve center of the entire operation. He found it at the far end, covered in a thick layer of dust. The door was unlocked. Inside, time had stood still. A heavy wooden desk, a worn leather chair, an old rotary phone, it was exactly as he remembered. He ran his hand over the desk, a strange sense of reverence filling him. This was where the empire began, not in a skyscraper, but in this humble, dusty room. He scanned the office, looking for anything that might correspond to the note, to the key. He checked the desk drawers, they were empty. He looked behind a framed black and white photograph of the original factory crew, his father a young, determined man in the center. Nothing. Dejected, he was about to leave when his light caught something under the desk. A section of the floorboards looked different, the wood slightly newer, the seams less worn. He knelt down, his fingers tracing the outline. It was a hidden panel. Using the edge of the heavy key as a lever, he pried it open. Beneath it was a recessed, fireproof lockbox, its metal face bearing a small, simple keyhole. With a trembling hand, he inserted the brass key. It was a perfect fit. He turned it, and the heavy lid of the box sprang open. His first feeling was disappointment. There were no stock certificates, no bundles of cash, no secret deeds. The box was filled with old, leather-bound ledgers. But beneath them was a thick, sealed envelope. His name, Leo, was written on the front in his father's hand. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tore it open. It was a letter, several pages long, written not in the sharp, aggressive script of his father's business correspondence, but in a softer, more thoughtful cursive he hadn't seen in years. "My dear Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means you looked past the anger and the money, and you chose to understand. For that, I am already proud." Leo's eyes filled with tears, blurring the words. He wiped them away and continued reading. "I did not lie in my final message, Leo. I built an empire on ambition and ruthlessness. But it cost me my soul. The man I became. I did not like him. He was a caricature, a monster of my own making. And worse, I saw that monster reflected in Clarissa. I pushed her to be like me, and she succeeded too well. She learned the mechanics of business, but never the heart. You, my son, were the one who got away. You rejected my world, and in doing so, you saved yourself. You preserved the part of me I thought I had lost forever, the belief that a man's worth is measured by the good he does, not the wealth he accumulates." The letter shook in his hands as the truth, a reality more staggering than he could have imagined, began to dawn on him. Leo's gaze fell from the letter to the ledgers in the box. He opened the first one. The pages were filled with his father's precise handwriting, detailing transactions, investments, and acquisitions. But these were not for Vance Industries. This was a completely separate entity, a company he had never heard of, the Keystone Foundation. For over 30 years, his father had been secretly siphoning a percentage of his profits, millions upon millions of dollars, into this foundation. The ledgers were a meticulous record of his true life's work. He hadn't been building just one empire, he had been building two. One, a glittering, hollow shell of corporate power, and the other, a silent, sprawling network of genuine change. The Keystone Foundation had funded the construction of 3 community hospitals in underserved neighborhoods. It had provided scholarships for thousands of students, the very kind Leo now taught. It had quietly bought up and forgiven the medical debt of countless families and financed shelters and food banks. It was an anonymous, philanthropic juggernaut, an empire of compassion built in the shadows. Its total assets, managed by a small, trusted team and overseen by Mr. Albright, were valued at nearly $500 million, dwarfing the corporate entity he had left to Clarissa. The letter continued, explaining the final, devastating piece of his father's plan. I gave Clarissa the company as a test, Leo. A final, desperate hope that she might see the hollowness of a life dedicated only to profit. But I am a pragmatist. I suspected she would fail. The $50 million was her inheritance, but the company itself was merely a loan. Leo's eyes widened as he read the final clause. His father had woven a legal masterstroke into the fabric of his will and the corporate bylaws of Vance Industries. There were two conditions. If, within the first year, the company's core value dropped by 20% due to what the bylaws defined as reckless or unethical management, or if she terminated the employment of a specific list of 10 long-term, legacy employees, people his father had listed by name as the founding heart of the company, then controlling interest of Vance Industries would be automatically absorbed by the Keystone Foundation. It was a poison pill, a moral trigger. The company you knew, Leo, became a beast, the letter concluded. But its bones are still good. Its resources can be used for so much more than just making the rich richer. I leave this choice to you. I am giving you not money, but power. The power to redefine what our family's name will stand for. You were never the failure, my son. You were the only one who understood the blueprint. You are my true legacy. Leo leaned back against the dusty office wall, the letter in one hand, a ledger in the other. He was not disinherited. He had been given everything. He had been given the chance to make his father's secret, final wish a reality. Armed with a truth that felt heavier and more profound than any fortune, Leo drove back to the city. The world looked different now. The skyscrapers no longer seemed to mock him, they looked like tools waiting to be used for a different purpose. He went straight to Mr. Albright's office, the old wooden box in his hands. The lawyer wasn't surprised to see him. He greeted Leo with a warm, genuine smile. I was hoping you would find your way, Albright said, his voice filled with relief. Your father was a complicated man. He built a fortress around his heart, but you, Leo, you always had the key. Albright confirmed every detail. He had been Arthur Vance's sole confidant in this decades-long plan, the silent architect of the legal framework that would allow it to come to fruition. He pulled a file from his desk. Clarissa, I'm afraid, has already fulfilled one of the conditions, he said, his expression turning grim. He slid a document across the desk. It was a termination list. On it were the names of 7 of the 10 legacy employees his father had named in the letter. Clarissa, in her blind pursuit of efficiency, had fired the very people who were the tripwire for her own downfall. The moment she did this, Albright explained, the transfer of controlling interest was triggered. The Keystone Foundation, and by extension, you, as its sole director, now own 51% of Vance Industries. The stage was set. Albright arranged an emergency board meeting for the following afternoon. Clarissa arrived in high spirits, ready to present new projections that showed a sharp, if brutal, increase in short-term profits. She strode into the boardroom, radiating an unshakable confidence. She saw Leo sitting quietly at the far end of the table next to Mr. Albright and scoffed. Leo, have you come to beg for a job? I'm afraid our charity division has been eliminated. The board members chuckled nervously. But their laughter died as Mr. Albright stood up, his face a granite mask of legal authority. This meeting is not about projections, Ms. Vance, he began, his voice cutting through the smug atmosphere. It is about a transfer of ownership. Confusion flickered across Clarissa's face, quickly replaced by indignation. What are you talking about? I am the owner. Albright simply placed the document on the projector. It was the clause from their father's corporate charter, followed by the termination list with her signature at the bottom. He then presented the founding documents of the Keystone Foundation, naming Leo as director, and the final, legally binding confirmation of the transfer of shares. The color drained from Clarissa's face. The complex legal language boiled down to one simple, devastating fact: she had lost. Her empire, her victory, her entire worldview, had evaporated in an instant. She stared at her brother, her eyes wide with disbelief and a shattering humiliation. Leo didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply met her gaze with the same compassion he showed his students, a look not of triumph, but of profound sorrow for what she had become. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The board members stared, stunned, at the documents, their allegiances shifting with the undeniable tide of legal power. Clarissa remained frozen, the confident CEO persona stripped away, leaving behind a woman utterly lost. Her life's ambition, the prize she had fought for with every fiber of her being, had been a test, and she had failed spectacularly. She looked at her brother, the man she had mocked and dismissed her entire life, now sitting in the seat of ultimate power. She expected to see victory in his eyes, the same triumphant smirk she would have worn. But she saw none. There was no "I told you so," no hint of revenge. There was only a quiet strength and a deep, unsettling pity. Leo finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, filling the vast, silent room. "This was never about money, Clarissa," he said, looking directly at her. "It was about value. Dad lost his way, and he was terrified that you had too. He didn't do this to punish you. He did it to save you." He stood and walked around the table until he was standing before his sister. "The Keystone Foundation doesn't exist to make a profit. It exists to build, to support, to heal. That's the legacy Dad truly wanted. And Vance Industries will now be a part of that." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You have a choice," he continued softly. "You can walk away with the money he left you and continue on your path. Or you can have a place here. Not as a CEO, but as a student. Come work with me. Come and learn what it truly means to build something that lasts. Learn what our father spent the last 30 years of his life trying to understand." He extended his hand. It was not a gesture of dominance, but an invitation. An offer of grace when she deserved none. In that moment, the dam of Clarissa's pride broke. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. The ruthlessness that had been her armor was gone, and for the first time, she looked not like a titan, but like a younger sister who had lost her way. Humbled, shamed, but with a flicker of something new in her eyes, a desperate, fragile hope, she took his hand. The resolution was swift. Leo, as the new head of the board, immediately reversed Clarissa's decisions. The 7 fired employees were rehired with back pay and a personal apology. The community programs were reinstated and expanded, funded directly by the company's renewed sense of purpose. Clarissa, true to her word, started at the bottom, working with one of the community outreach programs, seeing firsthand the lives that were impacted by the company's choices. The transformation was profound. Vance Industries, once a symbol of cutthroat capitalism, became a beacon of corporate responsibility, its profits fueling the quiet, powerful work of the Keystone Foundation. One evening, months later, Leo stood in his old classroom, which was now being renovated with new computers and books, a direct grant from the foundation. He looked at a framed photograph of him and his father, taken when he was a boy, long before the bitterness had set in. He finally understood. His father hadn't rejected him. He had anointed him. He had protected him from the poison of the empire, and trusted him to wield its power with the wisdom he himself had found too late. He had been given not a fortune to be spent, but a legacy to be built. And so, let me ask you again, what is true wealth? Is it the number in your bank account, or the quality of your character? Is a legacy measured in stock prices, or in the lives you lift up? This story reminds us that the most valuable inheritance isn't something that can be counted, but something that must be earned through compassion, integrity, and a belief in the potential of others. The greatest foundations are truly not built with money, they are built with heart. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own true worth. And comment below with a time you realized that the most important things in life are the ones money can't buy.